let's talk about the World of Greyhawk campaign setting boxed edition of 1983. There was initially a folio from 1980. This was TSR's, or the folio was TSR's first, I guess, campaign setting-y thing, which is obviously becomes increasingly common over the next 20 or 30 years. It's not the first D&D campaign setting. The World of the City-State of the Invincible Overlord by Judges Guild is, and the equivalent of this in that setting would be Worldlands of High Fantasy installments N and O from Judges Guild back in 1977. How far, I don't know, I didn't think I saw much about this, but how far this was a direct rival, it was seen, or the 1980 version was seen as a direct rival to those by TSR, and how far it seemed like a natural extension of publishing lots of modules set in Grayhawk, which was, all the AD&D modules to that point, up to 1980, 1983. Pretty much, I can't think of any that aren't. Yeah. So, this was that. It's by Gary Gygax. It consists of 2 books and 2 maps. It is really interesting. It's got a trade dress which is completely different to any other D&D box set I own, and probably just to any other D&D box set apart from maybe Battle System 1E. In that it's it's TSR branded here, but the trade dress as a whole doesn't reflect what the books look like, which I thought was interesting. And it's because there's less standardization. A very decorated box sets later, like Birthright, still have big AD and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and TSR markers on them, whereas this just has the approved for use with AD&D and the hollow TSR lettering, which you can see there as well. Kind of very underbranded compared to what will come. The books, the maps, let's say quickly, apparently there is an issue with these maps, a very small issue, but that a couple of cities are like a hex back from where they should be because of where they are in relation to rivers and seas and things like that. But yeah, just as a sample, this is the so-called Darlene maps. This is the as those who know will know, this is the Great Kingdom and east of the Flanaess. The region detailed here is not the whole world of Greyhawk. It's a regional gazetteer or whatever. These 2 maps go next to each other. They are different. They're not players and DMs maps. They're all, I think, player appropriate. They're non-spoilered. But yeah, this is the eastern part of the continent of Eric. There's a good article at Alan Groh's blog, Kuros Quill, about, I think it's there, about the western half and the fact that Gary doesn't detail it. There's a very rough outline in here of it. You can see it in some versions of the maps and some versions of the books and stuff. But it gets a couple of different weird, not particularly interesting or good versions over time, some more interesting than others. But Gary was in the Flanaess, that's what their campaigns were. This is a vast area, this is, each hex is 30 miles wide, and there's, how many hexes are there? How many hexes wide up? Well, how many hexes down are we? Like 97 hexes down and a similar amount across or whatever. So you're talking about a pretty big area. You don't need much more. It includes bits like Blackmoor from Dave Arneson's world is stuck in there. It later gets fit into the known world of Mystara. So it transfers. The maps are beautiful, by the way. I think they're widely agreed to be the best Greyhawk maps. I sometimes feel like that even about though I think there's some very good Forgotten Realms maps. The 3rd edition map is very good. Mike Schlee's maps are probably the best. He just hasn't done an actual worldview map. But I think I sometimes feel the same about even the 1st edition FR maps. I'm like, there is something to them. But there really is also an aesthetic value to this, of absolute clarity of use and text and style, which is lacking in the FR one. But yeah, the 2 books are Volume 3 of A Catalogue of the Land Flanaess, being the eastern portion of the continent Eric of Earth, A Guide to the World of Greyhawk. But confusing. if you don't realise what the conceit is, which I think is explained at the start of the glossography, which is the glossography to said volume compiled by Pluffett Smedger the Elder of the Royal University at Relmord, CY 998. So in the future of this setting, 400 years later, someone, an academic, creates a glossography for this Guide to the World of Greyhawk, and all that survives to our age, we are told in an introduction by the foreword by Steve Winter and Alan Hammock, is that they just found it and it's been translated. And because Smedger had actually got this whole gimmick of like trying to represent this history in his gloss in game terms, they've translated his game, which is not AD&D, into AD&D. It's very silly, but it's one of the few versions of this conceit for me that works. I enjoy that. It's only a page as well on the whole, you know, just as a decent sight gag. And it's interesting, it's very different. The fact there is a narrator, there are two narrators, I suppose, technically, in each of the books, is so light and so non-obnoxious that it's interesting to compare the later increasingly detailed narrators with the most famous and sometimes most obnoxious examples being in Planescape. That, you know, where those, and in other games, think about World of Darkness, the narrative voice in this is not a problem. These are basically just straight books. The two books are, this is the Guide to Greyhawk Volume 3, is a gazetteer of a fairly high level kind, talking about all kinds of random stuff like the ethnic backgrounds of the stuff, the languages, and the biggest thing is these political divisions and some economic information and political information as well. But yeah, geographic, political, economic, and then a section at the end about religion. And this is all, though it has alignments for gods, and in a few other cases, and gives information about, for instance, the servants of and types of troops particular people might have in particular contexts. This is not game information. In terms of, this is not statistical information. This is setting information, and that is an 80-page book. The glossography is the game information. And that split, I'm not sure it's ideal, but it's part of the gimmick, which may prove that gimmicks are bad. But I think it's also an attempt to say, look, here's the thing that players can have access to large amounts of. It's like the player setting guides in Deadlands, where there's then a marshal section, and then this is giving you the background stuff, the kind of stuff as the DM you need to know. I think this, in a sense, I can try to sum up most of my thoughts about fairly succinctly. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was fun. I like the coats of arms. I think it is successful. There's some random stuff, you know. It has some stuff about the heavenly bodies and the two moons. It has stuff about trees common to the Planets, you know, a 2-page spread. Then a brief history of it, which isn't necessarily particularly exciting, but you know, it's 4 pages. It's a classic example of, you know, you got a writer here writing about his game world, and you've got to hear about it. And it's not ideal, but it's fine. Populations, races, languages, glyphs, and then the main bulk. So a lot of the first quarter is a bit more indifferent in terms of, it's kind of needed, but it's not amazing. The political divisions and the geographic section is, though there is often an attempt to put in half a hook, they're kind of trivial hooks that you could come up with yourself. So the main thing, and the stuff at the end, the very stuff at the end on the last few pages isn't particularly significant either. It's the deities and the political divisions that matter. The deities actually I'll go with first because it's a smaller section, but is fine. It's got a list of lots of gods. It has basically a full pantheon list, of whom many are then detailed, not all. And there's some interesting stuff like, because of how Greyhawk falls off the map in second, relatively speaking, it gets the Carl Sargent supplements very importantly. The 3 boxes he's involved in, but because it falls off the map, it takes a Scarlet Brotherhood, a very, very late TSR, Wizards period TSR, I think, publication for Lurg, the lesser god of beasts and strength, chaotic neutral, to get a specialist priesthood. It takes that long to get there, and that's not, that's not common in terms of when you look at the realms and when you look at other settings where it matters. This stuff all comes up front, whereas Greyhawk gets this list here, and then it takes 18 years or something from the publication of the folio version of this for a speciality priesthood. Relevant because of what I've mentioned in the glossography about speciality priesthoods. The gods are fun. I mean, there's Gary's writing style veers, doesn't it? This is not him writing module information where he is disciplined, and on the whole disciplined, and understands it's an interesting thing given the suggestion, how much of this is just knocked up from notes for publication, and that certainly was sometimes the case with some TSR modules at the time, but there's plainly an understanding of the information you might need, and it's in that sense, even if it's not information he had used at the table himself, he didn't present it like that, he knows what he's doing. There's a degree of technical writing there, technical writing expertise. Here, this book is not meant to be technical writing, it's meant to be immersive and world building, and that means it hits and misses because he's not an amazing writer in that sense. The gods are interesting. There's a really different feel to the Greyhawk gods, massively different feel to the Greyhawk gods than to the Realms gods, or to the Birthright god. I mean, there's a sense these are maybe closer to the Birthright gods in some senses, but a lot of that is kind of, so very carefully middle of the road. Like Syria is a really interesting setting in lots of ways, but partly because it attempts to achieve a particular flavour of high fantasy. The Realms is this kind of massive, sprawling, decadent, increasingly decadent mess. I mean, it's pure to begin with, let's say, but and that's what's its great weakness and its great strength. Greyhawk has this weird selection of kind of, frankly, the slightly gnomic and strange gods, and they're not pantheonized. They have friends, but some of them just hang out together. That's the thing we'll find out about. There's a bunch of odd things like that where it feels like a very different feel, and the gods section alone gives this very different feel of odd and disruptive gods with this is something some people sometimes point to, but very little kind of like these, and there are evil gods and there are good gods, but very little of these are just the kind of the main pantheons, and these are the main gods, and these are the kind of good civilized gods people like. And in that sense, FR sometimes maps closer to the self-conception, say, of classical European peoples, and thinking, we have the city gods, we do this, generally speaking, the sense that there is a relatively controllable hierarchy and system, whereas here a lot of it's just a bit mad, and there's stuff like just interesting weird things like Wastri the hopping prophet, demigod lawful neutral, leans evil, and that's an interesting thing. But why? Well, because he's a god of humans, and racial gods aren't inherently evil, but he's a god of humans who there's this weird degrading thing where they've all, his followers all become more frog-like because of, there's some representation of a degenerate form of racial ethnic solidarity or whatever. You've got Zagig, which is Gary putting himself in the book, being the sole known servant of Bokob, who's the super neutral, magical god, and he is a demigod of humour, occult studies, unpredictability, eccentricity. It's fun. That's different and fun and quirky, and the fact that there's no one saying, can you make this like a more serious, legitimate fantasy product, works in its favour. Not because it ends up as this kind of heartbreaker setting, modern OSRE, BXE heartbreaker setting where everything's a bit kooky, but just because it has the sense of a world lived in by a game, and I think the relationships feel organic. They're addressed quickly. It's not always excitingly written, but that's fine. And the gods themselves, I mean, there's also a lot of dumb names. I actually like lots of Gary's names that other people don't like. Verbabonk, I think, is great, but Farlangen, I'm not sure about that one. Now, the political divisions is the main thing going on in here, in the guide. It is 28 pages, so it's nearly a third. It's about a third of the book, And you've got a pretty typical section is like that. That is, each of those is a political division. That's the Free and Independent City of Divers, the Caliphate of Ekbir, and the Frost Barbarians, the Kingdom of Frustii. And it will give you the ruler's name in 576 CY, the population, demi-human population, so population means human population, demi-human population, humanoid population, resources, and then a paragraph or two of just what's going on there. And these are political summaries and cultural summaries, and there's a weird selection of information. Like, it's not necessarily ideally written in the sense, it's not, by that I mean it's not like there's you need to know these things so you can set up a game in this area. It's a weird gazetteer in that sense. The sub-isolated position of Jeff, surrounded on all sides by mountains, hills and forests, has made it virtually immune to the normal warfare of the Flonesse, although at one time a brief conflict with Caeland was fought, c. 450 CY. Rushmore forms the nominal eastern boundary of the realm. The inhabitants of the Grand Duchy are a Flan, Suel, Erid mixture, seemingly combining the best features of each race. This is one of the kind of, more eye-raising comments. I'm trying to work out the genetics of that and how you hit the bell curve perfectly on any potential inherited trait. This is fortunate as they are continually threatened by incursions of formidable ogres and giants coming down the crystal mists. The Jeffites dwell in harmony with the Elven elves in the realm, and these two people often combine to combat the invading monsters. The Grand Duke, Owen the First, that's me, is a clever and valorous leader on friendly terms with the Earl of Steric and the King of Caeland alike. The force of the Grand Duke include horsebowmen and contingents of pikemen from the mountain holdings. The last paragraph is very gameable, and I'll move on to what it suggests is the game. But the rest is very, very broad overview. There's some stuff about who its allies are, that's helpful. It says about the leader. It gives a ton of it about the history, but the history is kind of relevant, and you need to really sometimes look back at the timeline for the history stuff that comes up, because it feels like a bit of a scavenger hunt as you're picking through. Like, when did that happen? Who are they talking about? Why does it matter now? And that stuff is partly because all that history isn't necessarily very exciting as a expositional thing rather than an experience thing. But they're okay. You get your population data, you get your basic facts, you get some economic information under resources, you get some military information, and it gives you a sense of the place. And here's the thing that this geographic division section mostly did as I read it, and I enjoyed reading it. It wasn't amazing, the writing is average, the information is sometimes weirdly ill-chosen or whatever, but I think what I liked about it, or rather the thing that happened that I value and I think is a good thing about this as a resource, is that it gave me a picture, along with the timeline as well, of a world that is defined by states and politics, and there are areas of chaos. There are points of light stuff going on. It's not a wholly settled civilized world by any means. There are humanoids everywhere. There's difficult monsters everywhere. Everything is next to something else. There's a lot of dynamic danger. So that's, and this connects to my other point, but there's lots of dynamic danger. Everything is next to a potential threat, pretty much. Just to say, so for instance, if you're in the Great Kingdom, or it's the 4 or 5 provinces that are named. So the Great Kingdom, I think, to split it up into more entries and to also make it slightly less politically threatening, is this kind of sort of Romanish Empire, which is nowadays the unified part of it is still 6 provinces or whatever. There's South Province, North Province, the Great Kingdom itself, the Sea of Medegia, and the city of city of Relastra, and the Sea Barons. That's it. And I'm not sure if Ratic, someone who knows more about Grayhawk might be able to tell me. Ratic seems to be is a Palatine, County Palatine nowadays, since it's isolated. Does that mean it's independent? I don't know. But it's this degenerated, and also morally degenerated kingdom here. You've got its enemies here, who are the Iron League. You then have the Scarlet Brotherhood there, kind of dodgy. The Vast Swamp, that's pretty dangerous. So you've got some potentially good places. This is a place where if you want good states to be allied with and work with. They're here, but there are dangers north and south. The Kingdom of Nyrond is obviously it faces off against the Great Kingdom as its main blocker, and you've got the bandit kingdoms up here endangering all this. You've got the lots of humanoid areas, users over here, this evil demigod place. So is the Horned Society. You've obviously got all these mountains, there's lots of monsters in. Stonefist is evil, so the Bone March has been taken over by bad stuff. So you could be in these places, and some of them are slightly more centrally located and have a bit more, they've got good neighbours on the whole, but basically everyone has a dangerous neighbour, and everyone has dangerous terrain which humanoids or giants or whatever are hanging out in and being dangerous in. And that's common all over the world, so there's a lot of dynamism, and there's not just that kind of adventure dynamism, but there's also political and military dynamism. And what's important about that, why I like it, why it feels very different to the default state of, say, the Realms. It's a bit more like Birthright in this case, but it's not so much like the Realms. It's not so much like Dark Sun. Those have cities and states which have politics and whatever else, but the way they're described is not defined by the historic political and military experience of them and their current ambitions. Whereas here in the guide, it's just constantly saying, you know, Jeff's political situation is like this, these are its allies, this is its army, and you think, oh, what matters about Jeff? Well, it has it has this political situation. The Rovers of the Barons, you know, who are defeated at the Great Battle of Oppicum River. They're defeated by a combined host from the Land of Use and the newly formed Horned Society. Perhaps 3 or 4 clans of but a few tribes each are all that now remain of the force which once sent the Tumans of the Wolf Nomads flying back across the Dulce without their grey-tailed banners. You know, there was occasional attempts at high prose. And so they're in trouble, the Rovers, this particular, the Ataman, led by their Ataman Kishwa Dogteeth. I wonder if the Rovers are meant to have a more Native American vibe. I don't know. But they are, you know, they're in trouble. And if you are locating your adventures in an evil civilization, a lot of them are not, like the Great Kingdom is maybe a bit less completely hostile, but most of them are like weird and hostile and difficult. And you see that in City of Skulls, the adventure, which is Carl Sargent, I think. Set in use where it's like, oh, there's all this crazy stuff, it's going to be really difficult to go around doing stuff. Your players have to think about that. You know, if you're in a good place, there's danger everywhere, and if you're in a bad place, well, it's even worse. And they're all defined in these political ways that set up, not necessarily the first level stuff. You might get some first level, second level adventures out of that, but on third level, oh, they go and help the barons, they go and do this, they're involved in this. Intrigue is an obvious one. If you want to do kind of more city adventures, or if you want to do ones which tend toward the thiefy side of things. But I think what you more see is that as players, not necessarily even at name status, maybe before that, before name level, they're going to start getting involved in the politics of these things and having to influence stuff and make decisions, and there's this powder keg of stuff waiting to go up. And I think that's really strong. That's a strong element of it, even though I'm not sure the guide is amazing. It's okay, but it's not amazing. The glossography, on the other hand, which is 48 pages, well, not perfect, and still sort of, there's an eccentricity to the way things are laid out and done, and how information is selected to be put in and stuff like that. But basically, this is just great. The glossography is a key work of Gary Gygax in terms of understanding how he thought a game could be run, not necessarily how he always ran a game, but how he thought a game could be run, and the things that players DMs might enjoy and appreciate. And it's something that, where it is weaker, or whatever, or where there were more problems, I was still greatly inspired, and I'm greatly inspired. And there's still, you know, in my Grayhawk game, this is a core resource for that reason. Even where I sometimes adapt it, and where it's strong, it's just strong. So. Let's quickly go over it. Then you've got just stuff about the map. You have rates of travel. This is is this miles? Yeah, this is going to be miles per day. They're given in miles per day, yeah. So that's useful anyway, and it's pretty common to other systems. It's and this, of course, should be modified by whatever encumbrance you're using in AD&D, first or second, which are obviously similar in lots of ways. But yeah, so your max speed is a foot unencumbered on a road is 30, a foot encumbered or searching on a road is 15. You can modify that further. That's in a day. You can moderate that further by modify it further via specific encumbrance. Of course, if you're moving at 6, you're at 12 miles per 10 hours on the road, including breaks or whatever. So that would be slower than encumbered or searching. But yes, this is a cheat way to do it, and it shows from the beginning. Of course, there were competing systems offered within books and systems published within a few years of each other. That's useful. There's rules about moving on rivers, lakes, and oceans, how to deal with water movement, using the land movement tables, basically, generally. Use it as if you're on this, but with these conditions, or this chance of being blown in a particular way. Yeah, I think it's, there's questions about wind. Then there's encounter tables, and you get explanations. You get a classic early layout issue of just, a bit of justified text or a bit of paragraphing, but no bold text, no white space tricks. It's triple column, which does mean you're getting a lot of information, which is good. But explaining stuff you might not otherwise be able to find in the DMG. So it says, where users are referred to standing encounter tables, so about half the results in each region, you're sent to the 1E DMG. And given the paucity of later encounter tables, it'd be an interesting thing, actually. I should talk about the second edition DMG at some point for the problems presented by how the layout is meant to mirror and supplement the PHB. But yeah, the encounter tables in 1E are great, and so you're pointed towards those. You're then given explanations of what would be a patrol or a night group, because mostly it's about when you meet military groups. Basically, all of these are, I think, more or less when you meet military groups, or the Rennie, who are a almost interesting but often fairly banally cliched idea of bargemen. They're described as gypsy barge folk. In Bushan traditionally, have been called barge folk. Barge people, which some people would find very troubling. There are some hints of something quite interesting in the Rennie, actually, but it's not quite successful, I think. There's stuff about meeting adventuring parties who may be good, evil, or neutral. There's then a patrol encounter table summary, armor. There's lots of stuff in the Rennie, actually. It's evidently something that when he's selecting information, he thinks, these people are really important. These are a really cool, colourful part of my setting. And I want to get across some of the flavour, the genuinely interesting flavour he's come up with. So they are basically over a page, 4 columns. There are 4 columns on them. You then get the tables, which are by region and type of thing. You can see roughly there. So, you're in the land of the north, the frost, ice and snow barbarians. You're in Bissell, Grand March or Kaeland. And then you roll your D100, and then you check the column for the area, and then you, if needs be, you go to the standard encounter table to roll again for that area. But and it does say here, if it's demi-humans, giants, humanoids, you also go to the DMG. So it kind of is. The problem with these is I really like the comprehensiveness of these. I think they are, given the only detailed encounters are meant to help you with military groups. Essentially, when you're just told gnomes or even one with slightly detailed like men/tribesmen, men called tribesmen, I think it's reasonable to kind of say, okay, there's a few things missing from here. One is that you're not being pointed or referred to monster stats. You've got to go and find them yourself in the relevant book. That's fine. But also you're not being given context. I guess you're meant to then roll for layer. You're meant to generate behaviour, and that's fine. But it's something where, again, in the supplement that's helping you do this, having a bit of detail and info on that would be helpful. Just some extra tools to help you make stuff up quickly at the table or to inspire your own stuff. So I use these at this point. I'm using these as inspiration rather than as straight tables. as I build regional encounter tables, using this as one of the resources. Also using other modules, other Greyhawky modules for that particular area, and using the 1E DMG. And it is also, there's both political divisions but also geographical areas. So if you're in the Gnarly, you don't say, oh well, some of these places are near the city of Grayhawk, or some of these places could be part of Verbabonk. You roll in the Gnarly Forest and Whelkwood table and you check on the Gnarly column. Wastelands. There are a few examples of like alternate encounter tables. So the Sea of Dust just gives you an actual monster list functionally. Rather than the much more, here's a list of the types of people you might encounter, or go to the standard encounter tables. The Wastelands particularly give lots of monsters, which I think is good, and that's kind of, so do the Mountains, to be fair. That would be more generally useful. You then get the Rulers of Greyhawk, which is just a summary of every single ruler and their class. That's an efficient use of space. It's that, if you want that information, and it's not bad information to have, I think actually just doing it that quickly is quite good, and that kind of briefly. You get a percentage of distribution of high-level NPCs, about how uncommon they are except in seats of power. Now that doesn't mean there aren't very high-level NPCs in lots of seats of power, including, at Verbabonk or something. Relatively small seats of power, comparatively. Yes, there are lots. It's a high fantasy setting in lots of ways. You don't want to exaggerate the Greyhawk as the sword and sorcery setting. No, there's Nyrond and Furiondi and Valuna and Verbabonk, and the Ulek states, and to a large degree Ernst, and Bissell and Grand March and Kaeland are the good guys. And then there's some kind of like Ekbir is okay. The Frost Barbarians, they kind of are on the right side. Ratik's decent. Things like this, but no, it's that there are good people who have resisted the Great Kingdom on the one hand and the bad Ketites on the other, and the monsters to the north. So the central western Flores, basically, and just into the eastern Flores. And then there are bad guys. That's the way that works. That is the setting. It is high fantasy. It's just a high fantasy that trades a lot on politics and military stuff, rather than on kind of just adventures solving gigantic problems. You get a weather section. This gives us a map of Eric, actually, which gives us Western Eric as well, which is this half here. This is a latitude display in context of the maps. That's really useful. It talks. You've got by month. You've got stuff about base temperature and daily adjustments. Sky conditions: is it clear, partly cloudy, or cloudy? Sunset and sunrise, phases of the two moons. This is some of the most interesting, useful stuff, and it's partly because weather can and should matter more even than I get it in my games. That's just something I'm developing on, and I immediately found this helpful, especially as I have a PC, because we're playing 2nd edition who has weather sense. I'm like, well, great, I have a weather table that is actually reasonable, gives reasonable results for the setting I'm actually in. Someone else has made for me. I don't have to go and find another resource. It's just here in the book. The idea that there's particular phenomena you can see in the sky based on time, that's good. The qualifier to that, and the very fact there's stuff about exactly how latitude and longitude matter, is good. You don't have to use it, but it is useful. And I mean, I know in a different game, in my my Chult game in the Realms, something that's come up recently is, for the first time out, as we're heading in the back half of a year, and the PC's like, oh, maybe we should go and follow up some leads and maybe get some allies in the north of the realms, because they're equatorial, they're in Chult, and they're like, oh, maybe we could go to this armourer who could do some specific jobs we need done. We need very high level armouring done, and so they're like, oh, let's go twice in Dwayne. And so they're like, oh no, the weather matters. We're going to be pushing there at the start of winter. We can't do that. So they're talking about overwintering and doing adventures elsewhere, and then going in the spring. And so geography matters. You don't necessarily need this kind of resource, but it's not helpful. It's a lot more helpful than lots of stuff in these books. That you in D&D books historically. The criticism perhaps is, and it shows a wargaming past. There's a lot of the assumption that tables and generating stuff is and very detailed wind chill tables and stuff could be interesting and useful. The criticism is that Rather, it owns it. It says that this system works best if the dungeon master generates the weather for 1 or 2 weeks at a time in advance of actual play. So you do stuff for it, and it gives you the process of doing it. So you know what the temperatures should be, the average temperature during the day should be. You know, because you check the precipitation chart, whether there's rain, and if there's a special result on that, which is 100, I think, you get a unusual weather phenomenon or whatever it is. There's a standard weather table, and there's a weird one, special weather phenomena, which includes volcanoes and avalanches and flash floods. This is the weird stuff, the dangerous stuff. That's actually all really cool, but they do lead with the lead. It's best if you prepare a lot of this up front as your players are adventuring, so you do not do this for every in-game day as they go there. You've got the weather up front, you've got the location, the kind of special events up front. You've got and that's going to affect other stuff. If there are troops moving around, it's going to affect them. It's going to affect relevant for in first edition as well as second, ranger tracking. Percentages. Whether the floor is the earth is damp. But there's lots of good stuff there. That's actually a really useful section, but it's going to require work to use in a way that is anywhere close to how it's presented. Tony Husso's talked about this to do with hit versus AC in first edition. That there's a reason why you get a line on the first edition charts, and his Excel character sheet has a macro for this, a set of macros for a bunch of this stuff actually, but where it's like you should put in your hit versus AC chart for your character, etc. just here, so you don't have to think about it for each weapon, you don't have to double check anything, because there are some of these first edition systems which require a reasonable amount of work to make work. And they're often clever systems, but you can see why those are the systems that are changed substantially by second, in a way that most aren't. Most systems aren't changed of the systems themselves. Gold for XP is obviously a separate issue, but the systems that are changed are nearly always those that require, like grappling and wrestling, turns into probably bluntly that's the one case I'd say it's probably superior in second. But in other cases, like to hit versus AC, it's not superior, it's just easier. And here you've got some of the same mentality of a very, very granular system that requires effort. It's an ASL / Starfleet battles kind of thing. Then one of the best sections, we've now got Adventures in Greyhawk, birthplace stuff, and then deity stuff, and that's the rest of the book. The deity stuff being the mechanical information. Adventures on the World of Greyhawk. This shows that this is the DM book, because it's not mechanical information mostly. Some of it is, but it's stuff about adventures you can run, and it gives you 6 adventure capsules. Of a half or 2/3 of a page, and it gives you a summary of published adventures and how they fit in. This is actually where you get the one explanation we have of what the WG series must have consisted of before WG4, Lost Temple of Tharasdon, is that the village of Homelet is here WG1, not T1, even though it was published as T1, and the Lost Caverns of Sojkanth is WG3, and the Forgotten Temple of Tharasdon is WG4, World of Greyhawk, coded T2, WG2 presumably being Elemental Evil. And it's weird because the books were never republished as that, but perhaps that was in his mind in 1980 that he wanted to reprint them like that or something. Or perhaps it was that this was written before the final publications where Sojkanth joins S, and the other S's are mentioned here as S's, and Homelet is T, but that I don't think that's right. It must be that he I think I've read about this before. Someone can correct me. I think there has been some official reason given. But yeah, you've got your L-coded stuff, your N-coded stuff, Q and S, W, G, G1 to 3. Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I noticed that. GC1 and GC2. What do they stand for? Not X1 and X2, EX1 and EX2. Dungeon Land and Land Beyond the Magic Mirror are on a GC. That must be Greyhawk something, mustn't it, as well, or something. The A series, the C series, and the D series. So you get all those classic Gygax, but also with some other people. The A series, C1, C2, and I1 is in there. L1 by his good friend Len Lakofka. N1 by Douglas Niles. They're all part of that White Blue Mountain by Lawrence Schick. And you get a location for them. The 6 adventures are interesting. None of them is really low level. There's every time there are some gesture towards. Of course, you must determine the enemies and change this to appropriate for the level. But none of them are a first level adventure. And perhaps there's a point there that he's listing Homlet and Against the Cult of the Reptile God and Secret of Bone Hill. And you can just go and do those, and those are low-level adventures, and that's so you've got those 3 options for a low-level adventure in Greyhawk. That's a campaign starter, and then there are a bunch of mid-level things, and then there's Tomb of Horrors is the only truly high-level thing, though. Sojkant Tharasdon and Barrier Peaks are just on the cusp, and D3 actually D3 is as well. But generally speaking, it's kind of giving you a bunch of mid-level things, and then the new adventures are mid to low high. So quest the Mist Golem. There's a Mist Golem who's going to come after and start killing people because of some old revenge, not ancient, old historic falling out between a mage in the city of Greyhawk who was hurting children and was chased out. That was the least interesting one, I think. It's also the one with the least details that you're told, oh yeah, this will be. It says it gives the location at a particular place in the cold marshes. You have to go there, and then it gives you the dangers. You're going to have to go through this and this and this, and that's good. It kind of tells you the stuff. It's a wilderness trek adventure that ends up with fighting Merc himself, guarded by trolls, gnolls, and invisible stalkers. You've maybe already defeated the. I think it's that you can't defeat the Mist Golem, you have to defeat Merc. That's it. Werewolves of the Menor is once a haven of safety for elves, pixies, others of their ilk. It's recently fallen to victim to evil intrusions. There's a band of trolls. There's a group of bandits who are pretending to be werewolves. There are some treants who aren't evil but are so angry they're very suspicious of outsiders. Owlbear and Ogre, Sylvan Elves patrolling, 24 minions of Wastri, the human god who's way into frogs, Blighted Elm Treant, and the Werewolf Band itself led by a werewolf vampire. I read that one. It's not my favourite one, but there's something so you're just like, this is a guy just throwing some stuff out. By the way, there's a werewolf vampire. He's the guy in charge, I guess. Also, there's some human bandits. They're pretending to be werewolves because it works. Like, it's fun. There's not loads of information on it. You can also tell from the whole, loads of treants running around, vampire werewolves. This must be 9th, 10th level or something. It's pushing high level without being blown, full out. You can also, as you design it, you can always have concentric circles of difficulty. That's not uncommon. So it's not incredibly exciting because partly it's just this random selection of awful things thrown in one place. But that's why it's fun, if not exciting, as a kind of like, this is an amazing adventure to run. Lost Passage of the Sulwars. This is great. This is the idea that there's a tribe of Suel, immigrants from refugees from what's now the Plain of Dust, or whatever it's called, who got trapped behind in the mountains. And it turns out they are still there, and they just have this wild situation going on where they're trading with drow. They found a weird thing they worship called the Mother, who they sacrifice, is a huge white glowing ooze who they feed people to, and has given them a reason for existence. And the tunnel seal's open, so the Larara, these people are there. And then they meet you and they act very friendly and they say, oh, come and... I think at first they're scared, then they say, oh, come and meet us, we'll be friends. And then it's just they want to sacrifice you. And there's just a bunch of fun things there, like there's a giant ooze, there's weird underground people who are have become weird and different. They ride millipedes as draft animals. They use the giant millipedes for mounts. And this squiggly cavalry makes up 1/4 of their troops. All their weapons have a parasitic fungus. They're really into fungi. They know all about fungi, obviously. and they're near albinos with pale bluish white eyes and silver white hair. They trade with the drow. Their god is a weird pink ooze. But then I think there's other things. What if there are some Lara who are not completely into the mother, or whether it's because they actually are Lothites, or whether it's because they want something better, and they're part of the party who hosts the adventurers and pretending they're friends and actually trying to sacrifice them. You can create all kinds of drama out of that, and that seems immediately very adventurable. Ironically, more than the simpler Menelwood one where there's these groups you have to put in the forest. Because I'm like, oh, I can see that. I can see the character conflicts and NPCs who are going to be important and things. The Jungle of Lost Ships is a habit of these is that these are Gary at his wildest. The Jungle of Lost Ships is, there's a Sargasso with loads of ships in it. We could go and raid them, like lost ships on the whole. But no, the secret is that an entire Assassin's Guild is the normal crew who goes with the adventurers. You're there to do the adventuring, and they are just humble sailors, and it turns out they're all highly trained assassins who want to kill you. That's a dumb idea, frankly. It's not actually a very good idea, but it's also hilarious. Like, you could do that. You could get away with it. You just need to blag it a lot. Really kind of lot of bravura. And then there's just loads of stuff in the great sea mound, great weed mounds. There's lizardmen, there's aquatic undead and aquatic monsters like a percynth. There's half-mad humans living over 8 wrecks who survive by fishing. They travel by walking on snowshoe-like footgear. All newcomers have to swear the truth of their doctrine. There is nothing beyond the waves, or else be sacrificed as blasphemers. And yeah, again, this stuff is just kind of throwing stuff at the wall, and you think, man, if we've got this guy writing another couple of years of adventures, not just the whole issue about T2 to 4 and Q1, but just like, oh yeah, do you remember the thing where he had like the snowshoe mad people living on ships? Oh, do you remember the thing where they were riding giant millipedes, and there was an evil ooze goddess? The Copper Raider is Perrinland. This is actually a really interesting one. It's still, again, it's just high level. Like, there is a large old copper dragon called Clonok. Is partly being possessed by a demon, and the demon can't really control him to make him do very much stuff, but he will make him attack copper shipments. And so there's this whole dynamic about having to negotiate, potentially subdue using those rules a dragon, the difficulties with the demon. That's really interesting. That is much less of a sprawling adventure and much more of a work out a plan. It's a couple of sessions, work out a plan, do the thing. But it's a copper dragon. It's an old copper dragon. And the Stolen Seal is the seal of the Frost Barbarians has been given to the Barony of Ratic or something like that. And then it's stolen, and if it's found stolen, it'll ruin their alliance versus the Bone March and others. And then they will have to fight. They'll have to go to a base. There's a strong evil force, 24 orcs including leaders, evil human mage of high level with appropriate magic items, 5 ogres all well armed and armoured, a charmed minotaur which protects and obeys the magic user. So that one is a base assault, and it's a solid base assault. It's not the most exciting of those, but it's a solid base assault. So there's this variety of adventure ideas that are just genuinely really fun, and some which I just want to run, and I will run, and I will make stuff up on them. Finally, after a tiny bit about like generating places of birth, there's the personages and quasi-deities and gods. This includes, there's the comeliness rules, which are dumb, obviously. There's Heward, Cotum, Merlin, and Kellenan in the personages. Then we get deities, and here we have a selection of the deities. We have the powers that gods of different levels have. We then have the gods who are detailed, basically most of the major ones: Bokob, Celestian, St. Cuthbert, who I think is technically a lesser deity, Elona, Erethanul, Farlangan, Uranus, Hexter, Incabalus, Istus, Euse, who is a demigod, Nerul, Obad High, Olodamara, Foltus, Radashaz, Raxivort, Tritherion, Ulo, Wastri, Zanye, and Zagig. And this is all fine. You know, this matches the standard from the monster manuals of gods and demons. You know, deities and demigods for lots of that stuff, and then demons and devils in the MMs. One thing is how these are meant to be puzzles. I think it's fair to say. None of them are a big lot of hit points with some strong weapons or something. What I mean, you know, that's something where there are a few solutions to high level play, and this is first edition high level play. Often seems to end up thinking, at least the implied gameplay of the things you get, the material you're provided with, not necessarily the adventures actually, though D3. But you end up, oh yeah, you just need to go and fight a god. That seems to be a thing that's an option. It seems encouraged. Second edition switches that to avatars, and they're very similar to these gods. You know, you can go and fight Celestium, or he can come and help you. But they're not just lumps of hit points with maybe a special attack, or maybe a special resistance, and there's not much, but it's mostly just a fight where you're trying to just take off hit points. Partly because the actual hit points are absurd. Celestian, 242 hit points. If you just take the normal rule of thumb of doubling it for D20 systems, so he's 484 hit points, great. AC -5, not even the worst by any means. And then you have the list of his magical weapons. You have his weird spells like Aurora Borealis and Starshine and Space Chill. There's a large degree, Celestian is in some ways simpler than some of the others, though he still does have MR90 and stuff like that. But I think it's just that, yeah, lots of psionic ability too. Psionic ability becomes increasingly common, you see, as the game goes on. But yeah, the idea that he's so good at so many things, you either have to befriend him or you have to bypass the particular strengths they have. Erethnul, for the first 5 wounds he has in a day, monsters turn up. They spring from his blood like from the teeth of Ares. That's fun. If you defeat Istus, she can't control fate for a year. Hextor has 4 arms because he is inferior to his brother, one of the other gods. So he's given 2 extra arms. So he has all these extra attacks. There's a speciality combat thing going on, like you have to work out how to defeat them. You need to be legend loring. You need to be like researching. You need to, in the combat, be like, oh, he's good at this, let's do this instead. And that's really good. It's not always going to be useful, but I think this philosophy is good. The other thing about the gods, and this is the final thing I'll say describing the product, is that this is where specialty priests come from in TSR terms. That many of the gods, for instance, Olodumara's clerics hide in shadows or as thieves 1 level lower than their clerical level. They are taught musical skills equal to those of the 1st level bard and at 3rd level, 2nd level bard at 4th level, 3rd level bard at 6th and higher. Remember, this is bard, the prestige class. Finally, clerics of Olodumara gain the ability to change self at 8th and higher levels, the duration being as if the caster were an illusionist at the same level. And most of the gods have this. Some have an experience penalty to make it work, to make it balanced in the same way that classes have experience point balances. And that's of course the explanation of the druid having a higher XP requirement than the cleric, and more relevant in first, more obviously fair in first. And it's interesting there because, again, when we think about rules bloat, lots of the things we think about kind of the change and rules bloat between first and second, not all, but a lot of them, certainly the UA stuff, which is mostly not amazing, most of the player side is not amazing, and is heavily, the player side, heavily modified before any of it goes into second, some of it abandoned or removed, and all of it, even where it returns later, heavily modified, all of that kind of the weird, dodgy stuff. But specialty priests, including druids, of course, who become one, are not a 1989 idea. They're not an 1985 idea or something, whatever. They are, we know that we have specialist wizards because we have illusionists, and we know we have specialist priests because we have clerics, and there are subspecies of the whole genre. But we also have Greyhawk specialty priests from World of Greyhawk. From the glossography, and the idea that no, you can sometimes for cost you can become better at certain things and get free powers, and there are problems with that sometimes in design terms, but but often it's very successful. It's one of those areas that the better products of its form in second edition are actually good and creative because they create characters with more limitations. An obvious one, the only cleric in my campaign, in my Greyhawk game, is he's a fighter cleric, half-orc fighter cleric of Lurg. And Lurg's priests, they're priests and shamans. Priests have goodish magic access, goodish combat access, no turn undead. And they have some other granted powers. And you're like, that's great. You know, that's a genuine, like, interesting trade-off between... It's a way of modulating the different classes and giving them different challenges, which is the difference between the old and new school so often is about player challenge, isn't it? You know, the players are meant to be challenged by the things they have to use their knowledge of the world and the skills and equipment at their disposal intelligently, given they are limited in so many areas. So what do I think about World of Greyhawk? Well, I think it's really good. I think it's... the glossography is inspiring throughout, has a lot of directly usable information. Some of it takes a lot of effort, but it's worth it. I think some of it is going to be more useful as inspiration, but none of it is useless. The guide itself is really useful for giving a flavour of a land where heroes of lore are needed. There's a B2 feel, actually, if you want to put it that way, in Gygax terms, that there are heroes of lore needed to set the world to rights. If we're going to have compare the first and the second edition PHB, and the fact the first edition has the thieving players and the second edition has the brave knights, here we have a brave knight. It's, you know, there's some of that going on here as well. And yeah, I thought it was good. I think mechanically it's almost the purest expression of any setting box I've read. Because it's just Gary being like, here's a bunch of rules that are weird and eccentric and fit the wargamers simulating the world mentality of early D&D. The actual material is only as good, or sometimes not as good, as some of those other books. You know, some of those other settings. Some of those are definitely a bit more invigorating. I'm not sure. The adventures, I think, alone are fascinating. A sense is when you're talking about the space they had, I'd wish I'd had more of the adventure stuff, because they are Gary working at a high level, I think. That's what I think of World of Greyhawk box set. I'd love to know what you think. If you could tell me in the comments, that'd be great. Correct the things I've said that are wrong. And yeah, recommend any other favourite Greyhawk products. Till next time.